There was a long time where I didn't know when/if this day would come because there was the lockout happening. And I was like, okay, I got my honeymoon at the end of the month. Maybe by May 3rd, when I get back, we'll actually be looking at legitimate MLB games. Maybe spring training's going on by that time. May, maybe June is when we're actually talking baseball. But we're here. It is April 6th. Tomorrow's opening day. We got actual baseball games and real MLB DFS slates to discuss. And I'm pretty pumped. We've already lost a couple of games for opening day, but still, it's going to be a fun time, and hopefully we can win some money, pad that bankroll, and start ourselves on a high note for MLB DFS. Welcome on into the solo shot. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com. My name is Jim Sanas. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, here to break down Thursday's opening day MLB DFS slate. It is a 7-game slate with locks set for 2:20 p.m. Eastern on FanDuel.com for tomorrow. We're recording this day ahead of time because I want to give you more shelf life to listen to this podcast, get prepared for tomorrow because it is an early lock. So 2:20 p.m. Eastern Thursday is lock for this 7-game slate. Now, I will note I'm recording this on Wednesday, so there could be more postponements. There have already been 2 so far. The Red Sox and Yankees, Twins, Mariners, both already postponed. So those players are still in the player pool. Make sure you do not put them in your lineup. Your first tip for MLB DFS, don't use guys who are not playing. I still think we could see some weather for this slate. There is some rain in the forecast for the Nationals and the Mets on Thursday. That's part of why the Mets haven't officially announced a starter. Maybe that's like a tinfoil hat type thing, but they think that it could get postponed. And Max Scherzer is expected to be good to go for Friday. I'm assuming for right now that Tyler McGill is the starter for this game, if it does proceed. But just keep in mind that Mets-Nationals game could be in a bit of danger in terms of some weather for tomorrow. Other weather for tomorrow's slate, wind speeds in Wrigley are going out at 14 miles per hour, but it's also just 44 degrees. Now, wind speed in Wrigley does matter a lot. Typically, it's arrows up for offense if the wind is blowing out. Here, I would lower expectations a decent amount because of the temperature. Temperature matters a lot for MLB DFS, as we'll discuss a lot throughout this entire month and throughout today. 44 degrees, very low. Coldest in the slate, so keep that in mind with the winds blowing out at Wrigley. That is the coldest game on the slate, but the Royals versus Guardians and the Mets versus Nationals, both at 50 degrees. That's also pretty rough for hitting. Braves versus Reds, a bit better, 61 degrees. Winds blowing out at 20 miles per hour. So that one's more neutral once you account for the wind and the temperature. The 2 prime spots for hitting in terms of weather are the Angels versus the Astros and Padres versus Diamondbacks. Both those games will have ideal hitting conditions, so I'd upgrade hitters in those games, downgrade pitchers there. We'll be talking about those 2 games in our stacking section later on. If you are a new listener to the Solo Shot, this is our daily MLB DFS podcast here on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. What we'll do every weekday here around 9:30 or so Eastern, I will go through pitchers, go through 3 pitchers I like, 2 guys in any tier, and then 1 value pitcher. I will go through my 3 favorite stacks for the day. Stacking, for those of you who are not familiar with MLB DFS, is pairing teammates together, preferably 4 on FanDuel, because every run scored, every RBI, you get some double dipping chances, but also because there's no clock in Major League Baseball, every hit from a guy in that order benefits everybody else on that team, every other hitter on that team. So stacking is huge for MLB DFS. That's why our focus on hitters will revolve around stacking. We'll finish up with 3 things that I want to watch for that day. Could be another pitcher I want to discuss, why I'm not on someone, other stacks to consider, some one-off batters, stuff like that. And then we will do some home run calls at the end, just for funsies, because why not? If you want to get the Solo Shot in your podcast catcher, wherever it may be each and every day, hit subscribe. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts. Just search for the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed wherever you consume your podcast. And while you're there, leave us a rating and review as well. On this same feed, we have UFC via Austin Swaim. I've got NASCAR. That'll be on Friday for Martinsville. Tom Vecchio talking NHL DFS, NBA wrapping up here shortly, but still some NHL stuff via Tom there. And of course, Brandon Gadula and I breaking down PGA each week. The Masters podcast, if you're listening here on Wednesday, is posted on the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed and also over on the FanDuel YouTube page. So again, hit subscribe. And if you like what you hear, leave us a rating and review as well. While you're listening for today, you can start filling out some lineups over at FanDuel.com because they have a big contest up for opening day. Go to FanDuel.com, make your lineup of players, sit back and enjoy the start of America's most beautiful game. For only $4, you can enter a lineup and compete for a chance to win part of the $400,000 prize pool. Head to FanDuel.com today and get ready for MLB Opening Day with FanDuel Daily Fantasy. Eligibility restrictions apply. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app for more details. Let's dive into our pitching preview for this opening day slate. Corbin Burnes is the highest salary guy in FanDuel for Thursday. He is $11,200. We got Shohei Ohtani at $10,500. Because Ohtani is a pitcher, you will not be able to use him as a hitter in DFS on Thursday. Keep that in mind because the Angels may be relevant there later on. Shane Bieber checks in at $10,040. Yu Darvish is $9,400. Max Fried, $93. And then Tyler Mahle, Framber Valdez, and Adam Wainwright are the others at $8,000 or higher. Now, a new thing for this year is I have my own strikeout projections for this year because I wanted to have control over pitch counts, which relevant samples to dig in, opponent stuff, and all of that. So that's why I'm going with my own strikeout projections for this year. And when I run them for Thursday, Corbin Burnes is atop the list in a tier of his own. And I'll put him atop my list too and rank him number 1 for DFS for Thursday. He's facing the Cubs. And again, wind speeds projected to be out around 14 miles per hour, which is bad for pitching, but it's just 43 degrees. That will help partially offset the wind. And the good thing here, and this is pertinent again for today specifically, but also for the entirety of the first couple weeks, Burnes' pitch count is built up. He went 74 and 82 pitches in his final 2 spring outings, which means he should be able to go 90, 95, somewhere in that range for this slate. And a lot of guys on this slate won't be able to get there. It's a very good number, 90 to 95. Burnes is facing the Cubs. Their active roster had a 25% strikeout rate against righties last year. You can find the active roster numbers by going to Fangraphs, clicking on the team stats. There's an active roster button. Click that, and that'll show you guys who are currently on that team what they did last year. That 25% mark is the highest on the slate for Thursday. And Burnes himself, as you know, was nasty. He did make adjustments after the sticky stuff discussion. He threw more curveballs across his final 15 starts. And in those 15 starts, he had a 2.89 skill interactive ERA with a 33% strikeout rate. He allowed just a 32% hard hit rate. So he was not what he was before the sticky stuff discussion, but still really freaking good. He gets a great matchup here. He's built up, and I'm going to make him the top guy in the slate, trusting my numbers and putting Corbin Burnes definitively number 1. If you're playing single entry, I know he'll be popular. I would say just ride Corbin Burnes, differentiate from there because he is, to me, clearly the top guy on the slate. The park for Yu Darvish is not nearly as good as the one for Corbin Burnes because it is one of those 2 warm games on this slate. If Darvish were facing a different offense, you could easily justify potentially stacking against him. I think that's kind of the extremes we should go to with weather for this slate, but I am gunning for upside here. And Darvish has that. The weather doesn't matter as much for upside. It matters for floor, not as much for upside. And I think there's enough upside to put Darvish second on the list for Thursday. Darvish is facing the Diamondbacks. Their active roster at an 86 WRC plus versus righties last year. They will strike out as well, a 24% strikeout rate versus righties. Darvish did struggle at times last year, much to my bankroll's disappointment for sure. He tried to rein things in, though, by lowering his slider usage over his final 10 starts. Typically, I don't like that. We want more sliders, fewer sinkers. Darvish didn't do that, but he still had a 30% strikeout rate across those final 10 starts. He was getting whiffs, even though he may not have been optimizing his pitch mix to just get strikeouts. And Darvish is stretched out. He should be able to go about 95 or so on Thursday. I've got you projected for 6.97 strikeouts. Outside of Corbin Burnes, nobody else is projected within a full strikeout of Darvish. So really, it's those 2 at the top by a wide margin. I can accept some risk due to the bad park, for hitting when that's the case. So I will put Darvish number 2 at $9,400. I think the Bird's in a tier by himself, but I also think that Darvish is in a tier of himself of his own as well. So to me, it's Burns definitively 1, Darvish definitively 2, and then sorting things out from there. Now, the third slot here on the podcast will always be someone at $9,000 or lower to give you a value option if you want to go there. Typically, I do spend up at pitcher in MLB DFS because if you want to get strikeouts, you got to pay the piper, and strikeouts are pretty much everything on FanDuel at pitcher. So if we're going down to the value tier, I do think that there are two guys who are at least decently interesting. I'm going to talk about Adam Wainwright here, and we'll discuss Patrick Corbin in things to watch. Wainwright is not the type of pitcher I like. I just talked about strikeouts. He's not that guy. He's a good pitcher, but he doesn't get a lot of strikeouts. With 3 points per strikeout on FanDuel, they are huge, both for floor and upside. We talk about them for upside, but they also do jack your floor up quite a bit as well. They give you more wiggle room to make mistakes. Wainwright doesn't really get that wiggle room. He increases sinker usage over his final 15 starts last year. Again, sinkers bad, sliders good in terms of strikeouts, so that's annoying. And not surprisingly, the strikeout rate for Wainwright was just 19% across those final 15 starts. That's rough. So on most slates, I am not touching Adam Wainwright. But this is not most slates. We've lost Nathan Eovaldi, Garrett Cole, Robbie Ray, Joe Ryan, all guys who, in theory could have been potential options for DFS. They're not here because of postponements. And a lot of the guys who are good, like Shane Bieber, others, they're not built up in terms of their pitch count. Wainwright is. I think he should be able to go pretty deep in this game, around 95 or so pitches. And again, a lot of the other options on this slate aren't quite that stretched out. Wainwright is also facing a poor offense. He gets the Pirates here. They have an 85 WRC plus against righties. They did last year. Their current active roster did. They also have the lowest isolated slugging percentage on this slate. So not a lot of power. Not a big strikeout team, but also not a low strikeout team. So with Wainwright, you're getting a good real-world pitcher who is stretched out and facing a bad offense. Typically, that's not enough. I need a bit more than that usually, but I think on this specific slate it is. Again, I would consider Patrick Corbin as a more volatile option, maybe a higher upside, but Wainwright does work for me at $8,000. So to me, the top two pitchers today or for Thursday are Burns and Darvish. And then the top value play is Wainwright. We'll talk about Patrick Corbin later on. Let's move now into the stacking section of this podcast for today. And again, this is going to be a section throughout this month where we talk a lot about weather. I want to seek out warm weather at hitter, and that's tough because there are only two spots on this slate expected to have temperatures above 61 degrees. But they're both at 89. So the delta between these two games and the rest is pretty big. That is the Angels and the Astros and the Padres and Diamondbacks. So I'm going to start stacks here by talking up the Padres because I think that they are the no-brainer top stack on this slate. They're facing Madison Bumgarner. Mad Bum hasn't been too shabby this spring. Like his velo is up. That's not bad, but wasn't getting a lot of whiffs despite the velocity being up. I think that means we can still stack against him here. Bumgarner, as you know, did struggle last year. He did get some better results down the stretch. He had a 4.28 ERA in his final 12 starts, and he was throwing more changeups. So maybe you look at that and say, okay, figured things out, got better results, didn't let up a lot of hard contact either. So that could explain why things got better for Bumgarner. But he still had just a 4.87 skill interactive ERA in those starts with an 18% strikeout rate and a 44% fly ball rate. Those are pretty rough marks, pretty rough peripherals across the board. Now, this Padres offense is not elite by any means. I'd prefer them against a righty for sure, because we can, a couple more guys are in play there. But I still think we should stack them here, despite the fact they're not an offense I'm super drawn towards with Tatis being out. I think that they're still okay, and okay could be enough here. Given the park factor, given the matchup, I think that's enough where the Padres are the top stack. And it's also a good spot to roll out Luke Voit in his debut. He did struggle last year. Bad results at the Yankees, but he had a 360 expected weighted on base average, according to Baseball Savant. He lost some skills, more strikeouts, stuff like that, but he also did have some bad luck. In his career versus lefties, Voit has a 252 ISO. I think that he is a focal point on the slate at just $2,500 because he has power, good matchup, good park for hitting. That, to me, makes Voit a pretty solid option for DFS in his Padres debut. Of course, Manny Machado as well. Other guys available here for the Padres. So they're okay, despite the fact that it's not my favorite lineup right now by any means. Moving to our second stack, if this were a summer slate and like typical slate, MLB DFS, things fully wrapped up, I would never stack the Angels because I like Framber Valdez a lot. I think he does a good job of keeping the ball on the ground, gets some strikeouts, and he's a decent pitcher. But again, weather matters a lot. And they've got great weather for hitting, the Angels do. I think that's enough to make them justifiable behind the Padres for Thursday. Valdez, again, is good. He had a 3.79 ERA for the full season, and actually, he did get better down the stretch when he cut back on his changeup. So I like him. I like Framber Valdez. But there are some things that make stacking against him viable here. We don't have a lot of great options for stacking. Valdez had just a 21% strikeout rate. That means opponents put the ball in play a lot, and balls in play are chances for upside in DFS. And 47% of those balls in play were hard hit. Hard hit here means exit velocity of 95 plus miles per hour, according to the data over at StatCast. So those fly balls or those balls in play weren't in the air like we'd like, but they were hit decently hard. And we also did see Valdez drop off on the road. He had a 19% strikeout rate there versus 25% at home. So Valdez is good. And again, typically I wouldn't do this, but I think the weather and the lack of other options elsewhere does push us towards doing this. So I will stack the Angels here. You look at the Angels numbers versus lefties, they were not good, just a middling WRC plus. But that was 47 plate appearances by Mike Trout, 80 by Anthony Rendon, 45 by Joe Adell. If you add up the numbers of those three, give them full years of health, that should help this team out a ton. So Rendon, $3,200, Adell, $2,700. If using those two plus Max Stassi at $2,400 helps you get to Mike Trout, who I believe is 42, we can party. So I think Adell, Rendon, key focal points. I don't think Trout will be too hard to get to even in your Burns lineups because, you can't use Ohtani for this slate. So I do think that the Angels, despite the fact I do like Valdez, very much in play for this slate. As for the third stack, I'm going to go with the Braves here. I broadly also really like Tyler Mahle, so I spent most of the Angels section talking up Framber Valdez despite stacking against him. Probably going to do the same thing here with Mahle. I will probably use him as a pitcher at some point this year, but there are a couple of factors working against him. The first one is that this is a tough matchup for Mahle. Even with no Ron Acuna Jr., the Braves are a very good team. Their active roster led this slate by a wide margin in both ISO and fly ball rate versus righties. That's rough in general. But Mahle also let up a 37% fly ball rate. So he let up some fly balls, and he can dabble in some long balls for sure. It is also a warmer park here than some other spots, 61 degrees. Wind is blowing out. Those are good things for hitting. We've also seen the Braves have a good blend of both the righties and lefties in this lineup because Mahle was weirdly good versus lefties last year in terms of his strikeout rate and contact suppression. And the top three guys in this lineup should bat left-handed. So that might be a concern with Mahle and the way he played last year. But we have Austin Riley, Marcell Ozuna, Adam Duvall, and Dansby Swanson, all right-handed batters in this lineup who have some power. So this is not a floor stack. Most stacks aren't because hitting is volatile. But I think that the upside is there for sure. Mahle could be very effective. So the floor here is not good. I do like the ceiling, though. That's why I'm willing to stack the Braves here, even while acknowledging that Mahle, at least in my eyes, is a good pitcher. Looking at this Braves team, I think Adam Duvall specifically is going to be a really good tournament play for opening day. He's batting lower in the order, which should lower his roster rate, but also he doesn't have the platoon advantage. People see righty on righty. They're not going to go right towards Duvall, even if they do decide they want to stack the Braves. But Duvall versus righties, a 292 ISO last year, 52% fly ball rate, and his salary is $2,800. So I love the outside of Adam Duvall. I'll be very heavy on him here as a tournament type option. I also broadly think that Matt Olson is going to obliterate things this year. So I'll be high on him, even though Mahle is good against lefties. So to me, the focal points of a Brave stack, Duvall for tournaments, Olson overall. And I think that despite the fact that Mahle is very good, the Braves are a team we can feel good about for stacking on this slate. Let's go now to things to watch. Three other things I have my eyes on for this slate. As mentioned before, I do think that Patrick Corbin is in play if the Mets and Nationals actually do play that game. Corbin was legitimately bad last year, like you could stack against him, and he's facing the Mets. They should be an above average team against lefties this year based on some of the guys they've added. But Corbin is stretched out. He pitched really well in the spring, and we know he has been a quality pitcher in the not terribly distant past. I've got Corbin projected for 4.97 strikeouts. It's actually a hair more than Wainwright. I'd rank him below Wainwright, but will likely have shares in multi-entries. I think that Corbin at least has a path to being one of the top pitchers in the slate. And I think that I'm okay taking a leap on a guy who was not good last year because there's a path to him being good this year. The one team we didn't really talk about in the warm weather for either stacking or pitching was the Astros. They're facing Shohei Ohtani. The Astros are a low strikeout team. That's why Ohtani was not in the top options at pitcher. That hurts him quite a bit. Ohtani is still projected to rank third in strikeouts for me, but it does hurt him quite a bit. Ohtani does give up some fly balls, and the Astros won't be as victim to Ohtani's strikeouts as most because they are a low strikeout team. So I could see stacking the Astros here. It's very tough mentally to stack against such a good and fun pitcher, but I will do it at times just because the weather is so good. They're a good offense. Ohtani can let us some fly balls, so I don't want to go there because I like Ohtani, but I think that it's at least an option for today. I probably would rather stack the Astros and use Ohtani, but could go either way. Ohtani's really good. So that's a discussion I'll be having with myself for the next 25 or so hours. Two offenses in bad weather I will consider stacking today are the Brewers and the Guardians. Both these teams are facing low strikeout pitchers. Again, that means more balls in play allowed. Kyle Hendricks really struggled this spring. That does boost the Brewers too. It's a big downgrade due to weather, but again, the Brewers might get a slight bump back up because of the wind. So I'd probably rank the Brewers fourth for stacking. I'd go the Guardians fifth against Zach Greinke in his return to the Royals, which is kind of cool, but Cardinals are consideration for stacking too against JT Brubaker. Higher strikeout guy than we may have a perception of Brubaker being, but I think the Cardinals are there. And then the Astros finally would be in play at some point as well. Let's finish up here with some dinger calls for this opening day slate. As always, we'll do one boring call and one fun one. The boring call, just who I think is a home run. You know, we're not going contrarian here. Here, I will go with Manny Machado. He didn't show a lot of power versus lefties last year, but he had the building blocks for power. He had some fly balls, decently high hit rate. Didn't strike out a lot, so I'll go Manny Machado as my first boring home run call. The fun one, I will go Adam Duvall. Mentioned him before. Malley has those weird reverse splits versus righties and lefties. Duvall, tons of power. Batting lower in the order should help us get him at a lower roster rate. So the official home run calls for opening day will be Manny Machado and Adam Duvall. That's all we have here for today on the Solo Shot. But I saw some people over in the YouTube comments like Savan asking for some bets for opening day. Savan, don't worry. We're going to have a full betting stream tomorrow on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. It'll be me and Tom Vecchio. You know Tom. He's on SportsGrid a lot. He fills in for me on the Solo Shot. Really good guy in terms of like dinger bets. So I'm going to have Tom on. We're going to go through our favorite bets for opening day from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern on the FanDuel YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, and Twitter pages. I'll go through my strikeout projections, how they compare to K-props. There are 3 money lines I like right now. We'll talk about those in the show as well. And I want to hear your favorite bets. So if you're laying down some bets for opening day, put those in the comments tomorrow on that stream. I see Bergen Lights is talking about some bets as well. So if you want to talk some betting, we'll be here tomorrow, 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, breaking down our favorite bets with myself and Tom Vecchio and talking about your favorite bets as well, building out some same game parlays maybe. I don't know. We'll see. But that's 1 to 2 p.m. on the FanDuel YouTube page tomorrow. Check us out right there. As far as the podcast goes, make sure you are subscribed to the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed to get the Solo Shot every weekday around 9:30 p.m. Eastern, breaking down my thoughts on the slate. It'll go up on the FanDuel YouTube page. Won't typically be live like it is right now. We'll post it after the fact, but that should be up around between 9:30 and 10 too. So subscribe to the FanDuel YouTube page, hit like there, and also follow the numberFire Daily Fantasy Podcast feed. If you have questions for me, it's a new year. Totally understandable. Hit me up on Twitter. I am on Twitter at JimSannes, JimSannes. You can also follow the FanDuel Podcast Network at FanDuel Podcast. Big thank you to everyone for tuning in for today. Good luck to you with your MLB DFS lineups. We'll talk to you once again Friday for our first fullish slate of the year. This has been the Solo Shot right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.